The night that changed everything. December 9, 2010. Manhattan's Soho House, an exclusive members-only club where celebrities and fashion elite gather behind closed doors. At 12:41 a.m., what seemed like a routine maintenance complaint would uncover one of New York's most chilling murders. A guest on the 9th floor called the front desk, frustrated by water dripping from their ceiling, staining the pristine white walls above their bed. It was an ordinary complaint at an extraordinary place. But this wasn't ordinary plumbing. This was blood-tinged water, carrying with it the final moments of a young woman's life, seeping through expensive fixtures into the room below. The elegant victim, Sylvie Caché, was everything Manhattan fashion aspired to be. At 33, this West Village designer had already left her mark on the industry, creating pieces for Tommy Hilfiger and Victoria's Secret. Her name was whispered in the right circles, her designs coveted by those who understood true style. Born into privilege but earning her success through talent, Sylvie represented the American dream wrapped in haute couture. She lived in a world where appearances mattered, where every detail was curated to perfection. But behind the glossy exterior of her carefully constructed life, darkness was gathering. The fashion world would soon lose one of its rising stars in the most horrific way imaginable, the discovery. 2 security officers climbed the stairs to room 20, expecting to find a simple plumbing issue. They knocked twice on the heavy wooden door. Silence. Using their master key, they entered a world that would haunt them forever. The lights blazed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the luxury suite. The air was thick with an unsettling mixture of expensive floral bath oils and something sharper, more clinical, the acrid smell of bleach or chlorine that burned their nostrils. A designer handbag sat perfectly placed on the untouched bed, as if waiting for its owner's return. But Sylvie Caché would never need that bag again. The bathroom horror. The bathroom door stood ajar, revealing a scene that would become seared into the investigator's memories. Water cascaded over the marble tub's edge, the faucet still running at full force, creating a steady drumbeat against the flooded floor. Steam rose from the overflowing basin, but it wasn't the heat that made the officer's blood run cold. There, face down in the churning water, lay Sylvie Caché. She was fully clothed from the waist up in an expensive gray turtleneck, her lower body clad only in red lace underwear. Her gold Rolex, worth more than most people's cars, glinted mockingly on her pale wrist as one lifeless arm hung over the tub's edge. The fashion world mourns. News of Sylvie Caché's death sent shockwaves through Manhattan's fashion community. Colleagues remembered her as brilliant but troubled, a creative force who'd recently seemed distracted, anxious. Her designs were bold, innovative, reflecting a mind that saw beauty in unexpected places. She'd worked her way up from fashion school graduate to sought-after designer, her pieces appearing on runways and in the windows of high-end boutiques. Friends spoke of her generosity, her infectious laugh, her ability to light up any room she entered. But they also whispered about her relationship with Nicholas Brooks, how she'd grown increasingly isolated, how her spark had dimmed in recent months. The fashion world had lost more than a designer, it had lost a bright light dimmed too soon. The age gap relationship. The relationship between Sylvie Caché and Nicholas Brooks raised eyebrows from the beginning. She was 33, established, financially independent. He was 24, charming but directionless, living off his family's wealth and his girlfriend's success. Friends described Brooks as possessive, controlling, someone who seemed threatened by Sylvie's independence and achievements. The age gap wasn't just numerical, it represented 2 people at vastly different life stages. While Sylvie was building an empire, Brooks was content to coast on her coattails. This dynamic would prove toxic, creating a power imbalance that festered beneath the surface of their relationship until it exploded in violence. Financial exploitation revealed. Text messages recovered from Sylvie's phone painted a disturbing picture of financial abuse. "You used my card again. I told you not to," she'd written to Brooks just days before her death. The messages revealed a pattern of exploitation, unauthorized purchases, loans that were never repaid, credit cards maxed out without permission. Brooks had been living off Sylvie's success, treating her bank account as his personal ATM. Financial records would later show thousands of dollars in suspicious transactions, expensive purchases that benefited only Brooks. Sylvie had been trying to regain control of her finances, setting boundaries that her boyfriend refused to respect. It was a battle for independence that would ultimately cost her everything. The mounting tension. In the weeks leading up to her death, Sylvie's behavior had changed noticeably. Friends reported that she seemed scared, jumpy, constantly looking over her shoulder. She'd confided to close friends that she was planning to leave Brooks, that the relationship had become unbearable. "I don't feel safe. I want you gone," she'd texted him repeatedly. These weren't the words of a woman in love, they were the desperate pleas of someone trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation. The fashion designer who commanded respect in boardrooms and design studios was being systematically broken down by the man who claimed to love her. The apartment fire. Hours before checking into Soho House, disaster struck Sylvie's West Village apartment. A fire broke out in her bedroom, filling the space with smoke and destroying part of her carefully curated home. The fire department initially ruled it accidental, a candle left burning too close to fabric. But investigators would later question this conclusion. The burn pattern was unusual, suggesting the flame had started under the blankets rather than from the nearby candle. It was almost as if someone had deliberately set the fire, forcing Sylvie to flee her sanctuary. With her apartment uninhabitable, she had no choice but to seek refuge at Soho House. Brooks, despite their deteriorating relationship, accompanied her, the last refuge. Soho House should have been a safe haven for Sylvie Caché. The exclusive club, with its round-the-clock security and discretion, was where Manhattan's elite went to escape the pressures of public life. For a fashion designer accustomed to privacy and luxury, it seemed like the perfect temporary refuge while her apartment was being repaired. But safety is an illusion when danger follows you through the door. Even surrounded by security cameras and staff, even in one of Manhattan's most exclusive addresses, Sylvie couldn't escape the violence that had been building in her relationship. The very exclusivity that should have protected her also ensured that her final hours would remain hidden behind closed doors. The forensic evidence. Crime scene investigators worked methodically through Room 20, collecting evidence that would eventually seal Nicholas Brooks' fate. Every surface was dusted for fingerprints, every fiber analyzed, every drop of water tested. The bathroom became the focus of their investigation. This was where Sylvie had died, where the final act of violence had played out. Despite Brooks' claims that he hadn't been present when Sylvie died, his fingerprints were found on the marble rim of the bathtub. These weren't old prints that could be explained away, they were fresh, clear impressions that placed him at the scene during the crucial time frame. The evidence didn't lie, even when people did, the bite mark. Among the most damning pieces of evidence was something prosecutors hadn't expected to find, a bite mark on Sylvie's hand. The crescent-shaped wound suggested a struggle, a moment when Sylvie had tried to defend herself against her attacker. Forensic odontologists, specialists in dental evidence, were called in to analyze the mark. Using dental impressions and bite pattern analysis, they would eventually match the wound to Nicholas Brooks' teeth. It was irrefutable proof that Brooks had been in physical contact with Sylvie during her final moments, that whatever had happened in that bathroom, he had been intimately involved. The bite mark became a silent witness to Sylvie's final fight for survival. The investigation deepens. Detective work in high-profile cases requires meticulous attention to detail, and the Sylvie Caché investigation was no exception. Investigators interviewed hotel staff, reviewed security footage from multiple angles, and reconstructed the timeline of that fatal night minute by minute. They discovered that Brooks had been seen pacing in the hotel lobby after supposedly discovering Sylvie's body, but he never called 911. Instead, he'd waited for hotel security to make the discovery, maintaining plausible deniability about the timing of her death. This behavior struck investigators as suspicious. What innocent person finds their loved one dead and doesn't immediately call for help? The family's grief. Sylvie's family was devastated by the loss of their beloved daughter and sister. She had been the bright star of the family, the one who'd turned her artistic vision into a successful career. Her parents spoke of a vibrant, loving woman who'd always been drawn to beauty, even as a child. They'd watched with growing concern as her relationship with Brooks deteriorated, but they never imagined it would end in violence. The family hired their own investigators, determined to ensure that justice would be served. They wanted the world to know that Sylvie wasn't just a victim, she was an accomplished woman whose life had been cut tragically short. The media frenzy. The murder of a successful fashion designer at one of Manhattan's most exclusive clubs was tabloid gold. Media outlets descended on the story like vultures, dissecting every detail of Sylvie's life and death. Paparazzi camped outside Soho House, photographers snapped pictures of the building's entrance, and reporters interviewed anyone willing to speak about the case. The coverage was intense, sometimes crossing ethical lines as journalists competed for exclusive details. Sylvie's death became more than a tragedy. It became entertainment for a public hungry for scandal. The media attention would both help and hinder the investigation, bringing witnesses forward while also contaminating the narrative with speculation and sensationalism. Brooks' background. Nicholas Brooks came from privilege, the son of a wealthy family who'd never wanted for material comfort. But beneath the surface of his charmed life lay a pattern of troubling behavior. Former girlfriends would later come forward with stories of possessiveness, financial manipulation, and emotional abuse. Brooks had a history of relationships with older, successful women, often becoming financially dependent on them before the relationships soured. Psychologists would later describe this as a classic pattern of predatory behavior, targeting independent women and systematically undermining their confidence and autonomy. Sylvie wasn't Brooks' first victim, but she would tragically be his last. The defense strategy. When Nicholas Brooks was arrested and charged with murder, his defense team faced an uphill battle. The evidence against him was substantial, but they crafted a strategy based on reasonable doubt and alternative theories. They argued that Sylvie's death could have been suicide, that the troubled designer had been overwhelmed by the fire in her apartment and chose to end her life. They questioned the forensic evidence, suggesting that contamination at the crime scene made the fingerprints and DNA unreliable. The defense painted Brooks as a grieving boyfriend who'd been wrongly accused, a young man whose life was being destroyed by overzealous prosecutors seeking a high-profile conviction. The prosecution's case. Prosecutors built their case methodically, piece by piece, creating a narrative of escalating domestic violence that culminated in murder. They presented the text messages showing financial abuse, the timeline proving Brooks' presence at the crucial time, and the forensic evidence placing him at the scene. The prosecution argued that Brooks had killed Sylvie because she was planning to leave him, cutting off his access to her money and lifestyle. They portrayed him as a controlling abuser who couldn't accept losing control over his victim. The case wasn't just about one night of violence. It was about a pattern of abuse that had been building toward this tragic conclusion. Expert witnesses. The trial featured a parade of expert witnesses, each offering specialized knowledge to help the jury understand the evidence. Forensic pathologists explained the injuries consistent with strangulation, while crime scene analysts walked through the timeline of events. Digital forensics experts testified about phone records and data recovery, painting a picture of Sylvie's final hours through electronic evidence. Domestic violence experts provided context about the dynamics of abusive relationships, explaining how financial control and emotional manipulation often escalate to physical violence. Each expert added another layer to the prosecution's case, building an overwhelming mountain of evidence against Nicholas Brooks. The courtroom drama. The trial of Nicholas Brooks captivated New York, with spectators lining up for seats in the courthouse gallery. Brooks himself cut a striking figure, young, well-dressed, seemingly calm despite facing life in prison. His family sat in the front row, maintaining their belief in his innocence even as devastating evidence mounted against him. Sylvie's family sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, their grief palpable as they listened to the details of her final moments. The contrast was stark. Two families forever linked by tragedy, their lives irrevocably changed by one night of violence at Soho House. Key testimony. The prosecution's star witness was the medical examiner who'd performed Sylvie's autopsy. Dr. Sarah Chin took the stand and methodically explained the evidence of strangulation, the significance of the petechial hemorrhaging, and the impossibility of accidental drowning given the victim's injuries. Her testimony was clinical but devastating, destroying any possibility that Sylvie's death had been anything other than homicide. The defense tried to shake her conclusions, but Dr. Chen's expertise was unassailable. Her words carried the weight of scientific certainty in a case where the defense relied on speculation and doubt. The defendant takes the stand. In a risky move, Nicholas Brooks chose to testify in his own defense. Dressed in an expensive suit, he spoke softly as he told his version of events. He claimed to have left Soho House after an argument with Sylvie, only to return later and find her dead in the bathtub. He painted himself as a loving boyfriend who'd been trying to help Sylvie through a difficult time. But under cross-examination, his story began to unravel. Prosecutors pressed him on the timeline, the forensic evidence, and his failure to call 911. His calm demeanor cracked as inconsistencies in his testimony became apparent to everyone in the courtroom. The jury deliberates. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury for deliberation. 12 ordinary citizens were tasked with weighing the evidence and determining whether Nicholas Brooks was guilty of murder. They requested to review the forensic evidence multiple times, carefully examining the photographs from the crime scene and the expert testimony about the cause of death. The bite mark evidence proved particularly compelling. It was physical proof of a struggle that contradicted Brooks' claims of innocence. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict. The courtroom held its collective breath as the foremen stood to deliver their decision. Justice for Sylvie. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Nicholas Brooks was convicted of second-degree murder in the death of Sylvie Caché, bringing closure to a case that had captivated and horrified New York. The jury had seen through his lies, recognizing the evidence of premeditated violence masked as an accident. Brooks showed little emotion as the verdict was read, but Sylvie's family wept with relief. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back the brilliant designer whose life had been cut short by someone who claimed to love her. The conviction sent a message that domestic violence, regardless of the perpetrator's wealth or status, would not be tolerated. The sentence. 2 months after his conviction, Nicholas Brooks returned to court for sentencing. The judge, having reviewed the evidence and considered the impact statements from Sylvie's family, imposed the maximum penalty allowed by law, 25 years to life in prison. The sentence reflected the brutal nature of the crime and the complete lack of remorse shown by the defendant. Brooks would be eligible for parole in 2038, but given the circumstances of his crime, release seemed unlikely. At 24, he would spend the best years of his life behind bars, paying for the few minutes of violence that had destroyed so many lives. The fashion world had lost a rising star, but her killer would never again walk free. Sylvie's legacy. Sylvie Caché's death became more than just another tragic headline. It sparked important conversations about domestic violence, coercive control, and the warning signs that too often go unrecognized. Her story revealed how financial abuse can be just as devastating as physical violence, how isolation and control can trap victims in dangerous relationships. The Sylvie Caché Foundation, established by her family, now provides resources for women trying to escape abusive relationships, turning tragedy into hope for others facing similar situations. Though her life was cut short at 33, Sylvie's legacy lives on through the lives her story has helped save, a fitting tribute to a woman who believed in beauty, creativity, and the power of transformation.